G'day there guys, it's your Aussie Hubby Markee, back at it again with another episode of r/idoworkherelady. Now with that said, I want you to sit back, relax, chuck a prawn on the barbie, and get ready for some bloody good content. Our first post today is by user I Got Greens Beans, titled, Employees Don't Know Who I Am. Context: for the last 7 to 8 years, I've worked at a paintball park, and know a decent amount about paintball overall. Well, the last 4 years, I've only worked at the park during the summers, since I'm gone the other 8 to 9 months for college. The turnover rate is pretty high, so there's always new employees. Bit of a long one, my apologies. Hopefully this fits the subreddit. This happened roughly 2 years ago, during my first weekend back at the park. I just got back into town 3 days earlier, and my friend who is the manager needed some extra help, so he calls me in. I didn't realize they had new work shirts, so I show up in a hoodie with the paintball park's name on it, so I'm at least wearing something that has the name on it. Manager takes me to a couple other managers and introduces me to them, saying, when I'm not here, he's basically me for the day and should be able to answer any questions you have for me. With that being said, I'm an unofficial manager. A majority of the employees don't know who I am, which is normal, this always happens. However, there were around 5 to 8 of them who were on some power trip and were trying to stiff-arm me, because they worked there for 8 months. 2 of them were quote-unquote managers. In my eyes, they were not managers, because they are in charge of a small area, the equipment area where customers can rent out gear. But they pretty much had no authority over anyone. So I'm working, doing my thing, and I had one of these guys come up to me and try to give me a crap job which I already knew wasn't going to fly. It sounds pretentious, but I'm the only person who can handle big groups because I've done them all the time, so he kicks me off a group to go to trash. I said whatever and started doing trash. The assistant manager, who I trained years ago, and the manager both asked me what I'm doing. I told them what happened, and they both got upset that someone felt compelled to do that. An hour later, someone else was trying to tell me how to fix guns. I told him I don't need help, but thanks anyway. And he still kept trying to tell me what I'm doing wrong. I told him no, this is how you do it. The equipment manager came over and asked what I'm doing. I told her a gun was broken and I'm fixing it. She told me to take it to the main manager because he handles all fixes. I told her I already talked to him and he said it's fine. She then radios him in front of me, staring at me, and asks him, hey, insert my name as trying to fix this gun. Did you give him the thumbs up? He said yes, so she just hovers over my shoulder to see if I mess up or not. At this point, I'm getting annoyed, because everyone is trying to tell me how to do my job, or what I'm doing is wrong. So I grab the 7 to 8 of the employees trying to stiff-arm me and pull them into the main building. I go to the assistant manager and ask him, who trained you? And he pointed to me. I asked the main manager, how long have I been working here? He said, I don't know, about 7 to 8 years? And I look at the employees. All their eyes are wide open. I said, we got off on the wrong foot. You don't know me and I don't know you. That's okay. We will get to know each other, but please don't boss me around when you don't need to. You've been here less than a year. The main manager said he was sorry that happened. I said it's all good. And he said just to float the park and help out wherever anyone needs some help. Basically, do whatever you want the rest of the day. Our next post is by user Sicko420, titled, yes, just because I'm androgynous doesn't mean I can't have a job. In short, I have a rare genetic problem that causes me to be biologically 2 people and biologically 2 different sexes. In utero, I had a fraternal twin that merged with me. I have 2 different sets of genetic material. I externally look pretty androgynous. I have biological traits, including reproductive organs of both sexes, and I intentionally dress androgynously. I'm a dispensing optician. I work in a shop that's open 24/7, and on this night I was the only dispensing optician. This means that even though there were others working, I'm the only one who can do work on certain types of prescriptions, or any prescription for a kid. It's like 3 in the morning. Some older guy comes in with a really young kid. I'm assuming his grandkid. She was pretty severely impaired visually and had snapped the frames of her glasses. We can have glasses made by morning, handed her script over to the lab, and we could have had it done by noon. We had to measure her face so we could have her frames fit her. I'm explaining the procedure to the kid. I explain it as I'm having them look through special binoculars that measure her face. I'm doing this, and the granddad screams at me from across the room, "Hey, why are you touching her?" I explained that I'm the dispensing optician, and I'm the only one licensed to collect measurements for the kid. He refused to believe that the store would let a transsexual work for them, and it took probably 4 people trying to convince him that I actually work there. After that finally was made clear, he demanded someone else do it. Nope, no can do. He wanted to speak to the supervisor. Funny thing about that was that I was the supervisor for the night. A trick I've learned is just to refer to another employee who can pretend to be supervisor. After a lot of argument and profanities, he let me get my measurements. I've learned to be sarcastically overly pleasant with angry people. So as he was leaving the store, I said, "Have a great day, sir." His response? "Screw you, tranny." That's not nice. What people often fail to realize is that we're only a couple of generations away from people who weren't even allowed to be left-handed. I'm so sorry that these intolerant idiots are still an issue. But I think people need to take just a second to appreciate how far we've come. After that second, get right back to fighting for equality. My father wasn't allowed to write with his left hand, and he's in his 50s now. Unexposed is by user Smelly Kaka. Titled, "Nice detective work, but..." So, many moons ago, I did IT support in a university department, a mix of end-user support and back-end server management. One of the lab rules was that students weren't allowed to lock PCs and then leave. We didn't generally enforce this, unless the labs were full or we needed to do maintenance work. It was one of the later cases one day. I found one of the machines locked, so I restarted it, did my thing, then logged out and left. Sometime later, the student evidently came back and got all bent out of shape about being booted off. He looked at the login box to see who the last person logged in was, figured out what the student email address would be. All staff also had accounts on the student email system, then sent a nasty gram tramping me out. I replied to him from my work address, including both a link to the lab rules and my usual signature, which featured my job title. I got back a very polite, "Thanks for letting me know, sorry for bothering you" message. When I was getting my computer engineering degree back in 1980, we had sysops, and one of the students got mad about something. He kept sending messages to the sysop until the sysop had had enough. The guy had all his programs for 3 different programming classes stored on the system. The sysop not only deleted them all, but removed him from the server. Student had to apologize in writing before being put back on, then had to redo all his programs. And our next post is titled, "I was the only one working." Now for some context, I worked for a large shoe company, but since we usually weren't that busy during times of the year, we would only have one person working at a time. So one person would open, arrive at 9 to 9:30, depending on the payroll budget that week. The next person would come in sometime between 12 to 2 to work until close, again depending on payroll. And then another person would come in to close with the other manager when the opening person was leaving. So, usually our days would be 9/9:30 to 4/5, 12 to 1 to 9:15, and 4 to 5 to 9:15. And this happened on a day I was working alone in the morning. Our store location was right next to a Weight Watchers store, so we would get older people that would come right after their classes in the morning, even though their class ended before our time to open. Most of these people would mill about in the plaza until we opened. This morning wasn't too busy, but it wasn't dead either. I was greeting people as they walked in and helping anyone who needed help finding something. This older gentleman, maybe in his 60s, walked in and I greeted with the usual, "Good morning. Is there something that I could help you find today?" He responded with a blunt "no," to which I responded with my auto reply, "If you need any help, just let me know." He walked away, and I was pulled away by another customer needing a shoe from high up on our wall. After about 15 minutes, I see this guy looking around over the bins. I walk over and ask if he's finding everything okay. He tells me that he's looking for an employee. We didn't have a specific dress code, so we could wear whatever as long as it looked nice. But we did have to wear these outrageously bright red lanyards with the company name on them, as well as a walkie-talkie, even when we were alone. I tell him I'm an employee and what I could help him with. He storms off without even addressing my last statement. He stops by another customer and starts to complain about the lack of service in the store. So I approached him yet again, only for him to yell at me, saying to stop harassing him because I was just another customer. The other customer that was looking at a shoe looked at him, then looked at me, looked at my lanyard, looked back at me, back to the guy, then back at me, only to just shake his head. I once again tell him that I do work here, and he pushed me out of the way and walked out of the store. He called corporate saying that there wasn't a single employee on the floor to help him, and because of that, he was followed and harassed by another customer. They called me to ask what was going on. I explained that I was the one he thought was the customer, and me harassing him was actually me asking if he needed help. Christ, this guy must be Captain Oblivious if he refused to listen to any sort of reasoning or statement of you being an employee, or he was looking for any sort of reason to make a complaint in order to get some sort of deal or something. Who knows? More than likely, how can there be no employee if the store is open? Guess he must have shooed him out. Ha ha ha, that's funny. Unexposed is by user Condensed Sarcasm, titled, More Like I Do Live Here, but Close Enough. This happened the other day when I was heading home after dropping off DD, 4 years old, at preschool. Don't judge, they take as much precautions as the local hospital does. We don't have any cases where I live, and I wanted to keep DD in her routine because it helps her mentally. As I'm driving, I realize that I've been unconsciously following the car ahead of me for pretty much the entire drive, which at this point was at least 4 different turns, 2 lights, and 2 different stop signs. I honestly didn't think anything of it. Of course, if somebody was following me that much, my paranoia would kick in, and I'd purposefully not drive down my street or past my house and circle around until the other car pulled off or got tired of following me. But I digress. We pull into the back of my development, and the car turns onto my street. I follow because hell, it's my street too. Keep going, following the limit, and the car is starting to randomly slow down and look at houses, or hope that I turn off on a side street. Not happening, sweetie. I see my house around the corner and sigh in relief, because DS, 8 months, is starting to fuss in the back seat. I start slowing down again because I'm close to home, and this car I've been following pulls into my driveway. I've never seen this car in my life. Me, being very protective of my house and where it is, pull up next to this car and roll down the window, just as the woman in the other car rolls down her passenger window and says, "What are you doing? Get out of my driveway." How about you get out of my driveway? With the actual "what the frick are you doing" eyebrows and tone of voice. She sputters, looks around her car all flustered, then quickly backs out of my driveway and peels off down the street. I haven't seen her since. I honestly have no idea what she was doing or what her endgame was. Maybe she was just trying to pull off somewhere and hoped that I would drive past her. Dunno. I think that's exactly it. She didn't want you following her home, so she turned into a random house, maybe in a random neighborhood, and just happened to pick the house of the person behind her. No different from stepping into a row on an airplane to clear the aisle, only to find that you've stepped into the seat of the person you're trying to let by. Unexposed is by user Cute Obligation, titled, Employee Thinks I'm an Insane Customer. For background, my aunt and uncle had a shop for school supplies. Also, I only just barely remember the dialogue. My cousin now owns it. I sometimes helped out on the weekends because I was free and my aunt was looking to hire more workers. My family goes on vacation for 2 weeks along with my aunt and uncle. A family friend was managing the shop for them. Once we get back, my aunt tells me to open up the shop for the day. The door was unlocked and I assumed that someone was already inside. I go over to the break room to set my stuff down. As I'm going into the break room, one of the new employees thought I was an insane customer trying to rob the place. I'll call her Bernice. So anyways, Bernice yells, "What are you doing here?" I say, "What do you mean?" At this point, I'm still wondering why my aunt was taking so long. Bernice tells me to leave or she'll call the police, and keep in mind at this time I was 16 years old. Right in the nick of time, my aunt comes into the room and starts ratting out Bernice. She says stuff like, "Don't treat my niece like that." Bernice wasn't fired because I vouched for her, and I didn't know what I was doing. 3 or 4 months after the incident, Bernice gets fired for calling one of my friends who was helping clean up a dirty rat. Or something like that. Unexposed is by I Have Insomnia, yay! Titled, My Sister Almost Got Fired for Helping an Autistic Child Explain What They Wanted. First time Redditor here, woo. This is my sister's story, but I saw it go down. Context. My older sister worked in an autistic school for a couple years when she was in university. In my family, there is a lot of autistic people. In fact, me and both of my older brothers are on the spectrum, and so OS was used to working with children with special needs. So, older sister walks into work one day, and she brought me with her. I was around 6 at the time, and I was very social. My anxiety only started kicking in when I was 8. So I had walked over to some other child and started talking to them, making sure older sister was still nearby. Older sister at the time was a sub, and the teacher was often had other substitutes replacing them for a day or two. Since autistic kids are exhausting, so older sister always made sure they could see her shirt. The school had a staff uniform, a black polo shirt, with the word teacher across the back, since the subs were different almost every time. This day was freezing, however, and older sister decided to put a hoodie on top of her polo shirt so she wouldn't freeze, since she usually monitored the play breaks and outside lessons. So older sister is sat on a bench, making sure nobody gets their head stuck in a bucket. Actually happened once during indoor play, and then a little boy runs over, bawling his eyes out. Older sister crouches down and says, "What's wrong?" The child continues to cry. "Can you write?" Making the writing sign, BSL, with her hand. The child nods slightly, still crying. Older sister gives him a crayon and a paper, then says, doing BSL right, "What is wrong?" He starts writing. In comes Kevin. Kevin is one of the subs, and he comes into the playground with a frappuccino or something in his hand. I later learned he was almost 2 hours late, but he was Kevin, so he didn't care. Kevin sees older sister with the child, and has never seen her before, so he storms over. And he says, "What are you doing? Get out. You don't even work here." "Oh, you're Kevin, right?" "I'm older sister. I was called in because Mrs. -- thought you weren't coming in to teach your lesson." "Don't pull that crap with me, you little liar. I know you don't work here. I bet you're just a freshman in XYZ high school down the road who thought it would be funny to break into an autistic children's learning area, which doesn't allow visitors." Actually, Kevin, this school does allow visitors if—" "Oh, shut your mouth, you lying little brat. Honestly, you disgust me." Random child to Kevin, "Can you please get away from me? Ugh, disgusting." And he picks up a stick and pokes RC until she runs away crying. "Anyway, get out before I call the goddamn cops." And with that, 6-year-old me was done. Back then, my anger was more easily controllable, whereas now I just lash out almost instantly. But I had had it with Kevin. I stormed over to Kevin, apparently, according to my sister, and booted him in the knee. "Ow! Get away from me, you little brat!" And he kicks little me away, literally. Obviously, I fall over and hit my head. The children in the playground, pointing at little me and say, "Red?" Turns out, Kevin had kicked me and I tumbled back onto the stone brick floor, but part of some of the bricks was uprooted and I had started bleeding from cutting the back of my neck open. The rest of the story is 100% what MS told me, since I passed out and stayed asleep for at least 3 days. He's like, "Oh crap, I'm not going to get paid now." Head teacher walks out. "Actually, you weren't being paid anyway. You were fired 2 weeks ago. Did you not get the message?" "Oh, thank you, older sister, for taking care of the children. I thought Kevin wouldn't come in. But he did, so I'm terribly sorry." Kevin turned white as a sheet, and looked between older sister and head teacher. He then threw his coffee behind him. It still had boiling coffee in it, and it hit a random kid. By then, an ambulance and the police had arrived, and the rest is history. Good news, my sister no longer works there. Unexposed is by user Fabulous Trade, titled, "Do these entitled customers have a mental disorder?" I've read a lot of these stories on and off Reddit, especially the Not Always Right site. I've noticed a pattern with certain entitled a-holes. Entitled a-hole thinks the employee is not a worker. The worker shows their very visible credentials that indicates they are an employee. Entitled a-hole claims the credentials are fake, and 1 asks for more proof, 2 calls the cops, or 3 physically assaults the co-worker. Entitled a-hole lies about the encounter to police until proven a liar. Entitled a-hole is escorted out of the building while behaving wildly. There is nothing psychologically normal about a person who reacts like that. Is there some kind of mental disorder that these people have that explains why they behave this way? That's an interesting question. And our last post is by Mocha Latte Man, titled, "New Federal Security Officer." This may not be the right sub. This is a relatively tame I do work here. For 25 years plus, I was a USAFR officer. I live near the base. I was also an analyst for a well-known federal law enforcement agency. Think 3 letters, the middle one is a B. Habitually, I kept my CAC card, my military ID, and my law enforcement credentials all in one big satchel that I could carry on me at all times. The base has both military and civilian personnel, and the security is usually handled by a federal agency. Sometimes, usually on a weekend, when I'm not on duty, I will make a quick trip to my office on the base to check for messages or pending orders that I can handle. I was a logistics officer. There's always a potential get it done yesterday fire to put out. One Sunday, I pull up to the front gate and flash my CAC card. Because I was not on duty, I was wearing civvies. I'm allowed to enter and park and walk inside. I pass through a set of checks and a metal detector. I go to my office, close the door, and power up my computer. Almost immediately, I hear a knock on the door. I open the door, and standing in front of me is a young federal security officer, an FNG. He says, "Hey, this office is military only." I calmly show my CAC card. He then says, "I don't think Captain XXX would appreciate a stranger using his office." I reply, "I am Captain XXX." I then flash my military ID, and he reads it more closely. He then apologized, adding that my attire had him confused. Alright guys, that's the end of our r/I do work here lady story for today. Tell me what you thought of all these posts down in the comments below. I'd love to know, and I'd love to see what you guys are up to today. This has been Markee. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.